Hello, 5th grade. Today we will be reading chapter 37 through 42 of the Tale of Despereaux. So when we left off, Roscuro had put his revenge plan into action, and he's using Mig to get what he wants. Now, did he tell Mig his true plan? No, he did not. He is letting Mig believe that her and Princess P will be able to switch places, and Meg will be able to be the princess, P will be able to be the maid, and no one will suspect a darn thing. Now, that's not really Roscuro's plan. Does he intend to let Princess P come back out of the dungeon? No, he wants to keep her there forever. Alright, chapter 37, A Small Taste. She was asleep and dreaming of her mother. So remember, Meg and Roscuro were on their way to Princess P's room. Meg had a knife. So she, Princess P, was asleep and dreaming of her mother, the queen, who was holding out a spoon to her and saying, "Taste this, my sweet P. Taste this, my darling, and tell me what you think." The princess leaned forward and sipped some soup from her spoon her mother held out to her. "Oh, Mama," she said, "it's wonderful. It's the best soup I've ever eaten." "Yes," said the queen, "it is wonderful, isn't it?" "May I have some more?" said the P. "I gave you a small taste so that you would not forget," said her mother. "I gave you a small taste so that you would remember." "I want more." But as soon as the princess said this, her mother was gone. She disappeared, and the bowl and the soup spoons disappeared along with her. "Lost things," said the P. "More lost things." Then she heard her name. She turned, happy, thinking that her mother had come back. But the voice was not her mother's. The voice belonged to somebody else, and it was coming from some place far away. And it was telling her to wake up, wake up. The P opened her eyes and saw Mig Rousseau standing over her bed, a knife in one hand and a candle in the other. "Mig," she said. "Gore," said Mig softly. "Say it," commanded Roscuro. Mig closed her eyes and shouted her piece. "If you does not want to get hurt, princess, you must come with me." "Whatever for?" said the princess in an annoyed tone. As I have noted before, the princess was not a person who was used to being told what to do. "What are you talking about?" Mig opened her eyes and shouted, "You got to come with me, so after we take some lessons, you some long lessons and me some short ones, together way down in the deep downs, I can be you and you can be me." "No," shouted Roscuro from Mig's pocket. "No, no, you are doing it wrong." "Who said that?" "Your Highness," said Roscuro, and he crawled out of Mig's pocket and made his way up to her shoulder and situated himself there, laying his tail across her neck to balance himself. "Your Highness," he said again, and he raised the spoon slowly off his head and smiled, displaying his mouth full of truly hideous teeth. "I think it would be best if you do as Mig Rousseau suggests. She is, as you can quite clearly see, in possession of a knife, a large knife, and she will, if pushed, use it." "This is ridiculous," the princess said. "You can't threaten me. I'm a princess." "We," said Roscuro, "are all too aware of the fact of what you are. A knife, however, cares nothing for the facts that you are royalty, and you will bleed, I assume, just like any other human." The P looked at Mig. Mig smiled. The knife glinted in the light of the candle. "Mig," she said, her voice shaking the tiniest bit. "I really do not think," said Roscuro, "that Mig would need much persuasion to use that knife, princess. She is a dangerous individual, easily led." "But we are friends," said the P. "Aren't we, Mig?" "Eh?" said Mig. "Trust me," said Roscuro, "you are not friends, and I think it would be best if you addressed all your communications to me, princess. I am the one in charge here. Look at me." The P looked right directly at the rat and at the spoon on his head. Her heart skipped one beat and then two. "Do you know me, princess?" "No," she said, lowering her head. "I don't know you." But reader, she did know him. He was the rat who had fallen in her mother's soup, and he was wearing her dead mother's spoon on his head. The princess kept her head down. She concentrated on containing the rage that was leaping up inside her. "Look again, princess, or can you not bear to look? Does it pain your royal sensibilities to let your eyes rest on a rat?" "I don't know you," she said, "and I'm not afraid to look at you." The P raised her head slowly. Her eyes were defiant. She stared at the rat. "Very well," said Roscuro. "Have it your way. You do not know me. None the less, you must do as I say, for as my friend here So, as I say, as my friend here has a knife. So get out of bed, Princess. We are going on a little journey. I would like it if you dressed in your loveliest gown, the one that you were wearing at a banquet not so long ago. And put on your crown, said Meg. Put that on your princess' head. Yes, said Roscuro. Please, Princess, do not forget your crown. The pea, still staring at Roscuro, pushed the covers back and got out of bed. Move quickly, said Roscuro. We must take our little journey while it is still dark and while the rest of the castle sleeps on. Ignorant, oh so ignorant, I am afraid of your fate. The princess took a gown from her closet. Yes, said Roscuro to himself, that is the one, the very one. Look at how it sparkles in the light. Lovely. I will need someone to do my buttons, said the princess as she stepped into the dress. Meg, you must help me. Little princess, said Roscuro, do you think that you can outsmart a rat? Our dear Megariso will not lay down her knife, not even for a moment. Will you, Megariso? Because that might ruin your chances of becoming a princess, isn't that right? Gore, said Meg, that's right. And so while Meg held the knife pointed in the direction of the princess, the pea sat and let the rat crawl over her back, doing her buttons up for her one by one. The princess held very still. The only movement she allowed herself was this. She licked her lips over and over again because she thought that she could taste there the sweet saltiness of the soup that her mother had fed her in her dream. I have not forgotten, Mamma, she whispered. I have not forgotten you. I have not forgotten soup. Oh man, 5th grade, what do you think's going to happen next? All right, let's see what happens. Chapter 38, To the Dungeon. The strange threesome made their way down the golden stairs of the castle. The princess and Meg walked side by side, and Roscuro hid himself again in the pocket of Meg's apron. And Meg pointed the sharp tip of the knife at the princess's back, and together they went down, down, down. The princess was led to her fate, as around her everyone slept. The king slept in his giant bed with his crown on his head, and his hands crossed on his chest, dreaming that his wife the queen was a bird with green and gold feathers, who called his name, Philip, 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 without ceasing. Cook slept in a too small bed off the kitchen, dreaming of a recipe for soup that she could not find. Where did I put that? She mumbled in her sleep. Where did that recipe go? It was for the queen's favorite soup. I must find it. And not far from Cook, in the pantry, atop a bag of flour, slept the mouse Despereaux, dreaming, as you know, reader, of knights in shining armor, and of darkness, and of light. And in the whole of the darkened sleeping castle there was only the light of the candle in the hand of Megariso. The candle shone on the princess's dress and made it sparkle, and the princess walked tall in the light and tried not to be afraid. In this story, reader, we have talked about the heart of the mouse and the heart of the rat and the heart of the servant girl Megariso, but we have not talked about the heart of the princess. Like most hearts, it was complicated, shaded with dark and dappled with light. The dark things in the princess's heart were these. A very small, very hot, burning coal of hatred for the rat who was responsible for her mother's death, and the other darkness was a tremendous sorrow, a deep sadness that her mother was dead and that the princess could now only talk to her in her dreams. And what of the light in the princess's heart? Reader, I am pleased to tell you that P was a kind person, and perhaps more important, she was empathetic. Do you know what it means to be empathetic? I will tell you. It means that when you are being forcibly taken to a dungeon, when you have a large knife pointed at your back, when you are trying to be brave, you are able still to think for a moment about the person who is holding that knife. You are able to think, oh, poor Mig, she wants to be a princess so badly, and she thinks that this is the way. Poor, poor Mig. What must it be like to want something that desperately? That, reader, is empathy. And now you have a small map of the princess's heart. Hatred, sorrow, kindness, empathy. The heart that she carried inside her as she went down the golden stairs and through the kitchen, and finally, just as the sky outside the castle began to lighten, down into the dark of the dungeon with the rat and the servant girl. What do you think is going to happen when Despereaux wakes up? He'll probably want to find Princess P, right? Let's see. Chapter 39, Missing. The sun rose and shed light on what Roscuro and Megariso had done, and finally Despereaux awoke, but alas, he awoke too late. I haven't seen her, Louise was shouting, and I tell you, I wash my hands of her. If she's missing, I say good riddance to bad rubbish. Despereaux sat up. He looked behind him. Oh, his tail, gone, given over to the knife, and where the tail should be? Nothing but a bloody stub. And more foul play. Gregory dead, shouted Cook. Poor old man, that rope of his broken by who knows what, and him lost in the dark and frightened to death because of it. It's too much. Oh no, whispered Despereaux. Oh no, Gregory is dead. The mouse got to his feet and began the long climb down from the shelf. Once he was on the floor, he stuck his head around the door of the pantry and saw Cook standing at the center of the kitchen, wringing her fat hands. Beside her stood a tall woman jangling a ring of keys. In fifth grade, why do you think Rescuro nibbled at Gregory's rope? What does that have to do with anything? What do you think? All right, well, let's see. That's right, said Louise. All the king's men was down there searching for her in the dungeon. And when they came back up, who do they have with them? They have the old man. Dead. And now you tell me that Mig is missing and I say who cares? Despereaux made a small noise of despair. He had slept too long. The rat had already acted. The princess was gone. What kind of world is it, Miss Louise, where princesses are taken from right under our noses and queens drop dead and we cannot even take comfort in soup? And with this, Cook started to cry. Shh, said Louise. I beg you, do not say that word. Soup, shouted Cook. I will say it. No one can stop me. Soup, soup, soup. And then she began to cry in earnest, wailing and sobbing. There, said Louise. She put a hand out to touch Cook, and Cook slapped it away. It will be all right, said Louise. Cook brought the hem of her apron up to wipe her tears. It won't, she said. It won't be all right ever again. They've taken our little darling away. There ain't nothing left to live for without the princess. Despereaux was amazed to have exactly what was in his heart spoken aloud by such a ferocious, mouse-hating woman as Cook. Louise again reached out to touch Cook, and this time Cook allowed her to put an arm around her shoulder. What will we do? What will we do? Oh, sorry, I read that wrong. What will we do? What will we do? Wailed Cook. And Louise said, Shh, there. Alas, there was no one to comfort Despereaux, and there was no time anyway for him to cry. He knew what he had to do. He had to find the king. For, having heard Rescuro's plan, reader, Despereaux knew that the princess was hidden in the dungeon, and being somewhat smarter than Meg Rousseau, he sensed the terrible unspoken truth behind Rescuro's words. He knew that Meg could never be a princess, and he knew that the rat, once he captured the pea, would never let her go. And so the small mouse, who had been dipped in oil, covered in flour, and relieved of his tail, slipped out of the pantry and past the weeping ladies. He went to find the king. Chapter 40. Forgiveness. He went first to the throne room, but the king was not there, and so Despereaux slipped through a hole in the molding and was making his way to the princess's room when he came upon the mouse council. 13 mice and one most very honored head mouse sitting around their piece of wood debating important mouse matters.
Despereaux stopped and stood very still. Fellow honored mice, said the most very honored head mouse. Then he looked up from the makeshift table and saw Despereaux. Despereaux, he whispered. The other mice of the council leaned forward, straining to make some sense of the word that the head mouse had just uttered. Pardon? One said. Excuse me? Said another. I didn't hear right, said a third. I thought you said Despereaux. The head mouse gathered himself. He tried speaking again. Fellow members, he said, a ghost, and he raised a shaking paw and pointed it at Despereaux. The other mice turned and looked. And there was Despereaux Tilling, covered in flour, looking back at them, the telltale red thread still around his neck like a thin trail of blood. Despereaux, said Lester. Son, you have come back. Despereaux looked at his father and saw an old mouse whose fur was shot through with gray. How could that be? Despereaux had been gone only a few days, but his father seemed to have aged many years in his absence. Son, ghost of my son, said Lester, his whiskers trembling. I dream about you every night. I dream about beating the drum that sent you to your death. I was wrong. What I did was wrong. No, called the most very honored head mouse. No. I've destroyed it, said Lester. I've destroyed the drum. Will you forgive me? He clasped his front paws together and looked at his son. No, shouted the head mouse again. No, do not ask the ghost to forgive you, Lester. You did as you should. You did what was best for the mouse community. Lester ignored the head mouse. Son, he said, please. Despereaux looked at his father, at his gray-streaked fur and trembling whiskers, and his front paws clasped together in front of his heart, and he felt suddenly as if his own heart would break in two. His father looked so small, so sad. Forgive me, said Lester again. Forgiveness, reader, is, I think, something very much like hope and love, a powerful, wonderful thing, and a ridiculous thing, too. Isn't it ridiculous, after all, to think that a son could forgive his father for beating the drum that sent him to his death? Isn't it ridiculous to think that a mouse could ever forgive anyone for such perfidy? But still, here are the words Despereaux Tilling spoke to his father. He said, I forgive you, Pa. And he said those words because he sensed that it was the only way to save his own heart, to stop it from breaking in two. Despereaux, reader, spoke the words to save himself. And then he turned from his father and spoke to the whole mouse council. You are wrong, he said. All of you. You asked me to renounce my sins. I ask you to renounce yours. You wronged me. Repent. Never, said the head mouse. Despereaux stood before the mouse council, and he realized that he was a different mouse than he had been the last time he faced them. He had been to the dungeon and back up out of it. He knew things that they would never know. What they thought of him, he realized, did not matter. Not at all. And so, without saying another word, Despereaux turned and left the room. After he was gone, the head mouse slapped his trembling paw on the table. Mice of the council, he said, we have been paid a visit by a ghost who has told us to repent. We will now take a vote. All in favor of saying that this visit did not occur, vote aye. From the members of the mouse council, there came a tiny but emphatic chorus of ayes. Only one mouse said nothing. That mouse was Despereaux's father, Lester. Lester Tilling had turned his head away from the other members of the mouse council. He was trying to hide his tears. He was crying, reader, because he had been forgiven. Why do you think he's crying, 5th grade? He's been forgiven. Shouldn't he be happy? Let's keep reading. Chapter 41, The Tears of a King. Despereaux found the king in the peas room, sitting on his daughter's bed, clutching the tapestry of her life to his chest. He was weeping, although weeping really is too small a word for the activity that the king had undertaken. Tears were cascading from his eyes. A small puddle had formed at his feet. I am not exaggerating. The king, it seemed, was intent on crying himself a river. Reader, have you ever seen a king cry? When the powerful are made weak, they are revealed to be human, to have hearts. Their diminishment is nothing short of terrifying. You can be sure that Despereaux was terrified. Absolutely, but he spoke up anyway. Sir, the mouse said to the king, but the king did not hear him. And as Despereaux watched, King Philip dropped the tapestry and took his great golden crown from his lap and used it to beat himself on the chest over and over again. The king, as I have already mentioned, had several faults. He was nearsighted. He made ridiculous, unreasonable, difficult to enforce laws, and much in the way of Miggery so, he was not exactly the sharpest knife in the drawer. But there was one extraordinary, wonderful, admirable thing about the king. He was a man who was able and willing to love with the whole of his heart. And just as he had loved the queen with the whole of his heart, so too he loved his daughter with the whole of it, even more than the whole. He loved the Princess P with every particle of his being, and she had been taken away from him. But what Despereaux had come to say to the king had to be said, and so he tried again. Excuse me, he said. He wasn't certain, really, how a mouse should address a king. Sir did not seem like a big enough word. Despereaux thought about it for a long moment. He cleared his throat. He spoke as loudly as he was capable of speaking. Excuse me, most very honored head person. King Philip stopped beating his crown against his chest. He looked around the room. Down here, most very honored head person, said Despereaux. The king, tears still falling from his eyes, looked at the floor. He squinted. Is that a bug speaking to me? He asked. No, said Despereaux. I am a mouse. We met before. A mouse, bellowed the king. A mouse is but one step removed from a rat. Sir, said Despereaux, most very honored head person, please, you have to listen to me. This is important. I know where your daughter is. You do? Said the king. He sniffed. He blew his nose on his royal cloak. Where? He said. And as he bent over to look more closely at Despereaux, 1 tear, 2 tears, 3 enormous king-sized tears fell with an audible plop onto Despereaux's head and rolled down his back, washing away the white of the flower and revealing his own brown fur. Sir, most very honored head person, sir, said Despereaux as he wiped the king's tears out of his own eyes. She's in the dungeon. Liar, said the king. He sat back up. I knew it. All rodents are liars and thieves. She's not in the dungeon. My men have searched the dungeon. But no one really knows the dungeon except the rats, sir. There are thousands of places where she could be hidden, and only the rats would know. Your men would never be able to find her if the rats did not want her to be found. Ack, said the king, and he clapped his hands over his ears. Do not speak to me of rats and what they know, he shouted. Rats are illegal. Rats are against the law. There are no rats in my kingdom. They do not exist. Sir, most very honored head person, that is not true. Hundreds of rats live in the dungeon of this castle. One of them has taken your daughter, and if you will send... The king started humming. I can't hear you, he stopped to shout. I can't hear you. And anyway, what you say is wrong because you are a rodent, and therefore a liar. He started to hum again, and then he stopped and said, I have hired fortune tellers and a magician. They are coming from a distant land. They will tell me where my beautiful daughter is. They will speak the truth. A mouse cannot speak the truth. I'm telling you the truth, said Despereaux. I promise. But the king would not listen. He sat with his hands over his ears. He hummed loudly. Big fat tears rolled down his face and fell to the floor. Despereaux sat and stared at him in dismay. What should he do now? He put a nervous paw up to his neck and pulled at the red thread, and suddenly his dream came flooding back to him. The dark and the light, and the knight swinging his sword, and the terrible moment when he had realized that the suit of armor was empty. And then, reader, as he stood before the king, a wonderful, amazing thought occurred to the mouse. What if the suit of armor had been empty for a reason? What if it had been empty because it was waiting for him? You know me. That was what the knight in his dream had said. Yes, said Despereaux out loud in wonder. I do know you. I can't hear you, sang the king. I'll have to do it myself, said the mouse. I will be the knight in shining armor. There is no other way. It has to be me. Despereaux turned. He left the weeping king. He went to find the threadmaster. I wonder what's going to happen with the threadmaster, 5th grade. Any ideas? All right, let's keep reading. Chapter 42, The Rest of the Thread. The threadmaster was sitting atop a spool of thread, swinging his tail back and forth, eating a piece of celery. Well, look here, he said when he saw Despereaux. Would you just look at that? It's the mouse who loved a human princess, back from the dungeon in one piece. The old threadmaster would say that I didn't do my job well, that because you were still alive, I must have tied the thread incorrectly. But it is not so. And how do I know it is not so? Because the thread is still around your neck. He nodded and took a bite of his celery. I need the rest of it, said Despereaux. The rest of what? Your neck? The rest of the thread. Well, I can't just hand it over to any old mouse, said the threadmaster. They say red thread is special, sacred, though I myself, after having spent so much time with it, know it for what it is. What is it? Said Despereaux. Thread, said the threadmaster. He shrugged and took another loud bite of celery. Nothing more, nothing less, but I pretend, friend, I pretend. And what, may I ask, do you intend to do with the thread? Save the princess. Ah, yes, the princess, the beautiful princess. That's how this whole story started, isn't it? I have to save her. There's no one but me to do it. Seems to be that way with most things. No one to do the really disagreeable jobs except oneself. And how exactly will you use a spool of thread to save a princess? A rat has taken her and hidden her in the dungeon, so I have to go back to the dungeon, and it is full of twists and turns and hidden chambers. Like a maze, said the threadmaster. Yes, like a maze, and I have to find my way to her wherever she is, and then I have to lead her back out again, and the only way to do that is with a thread. Gregory the jailer tied a rope around his ankle, said he could never get lost. As the mouse said this, he shuddered, thinking of Gregory and his broken rope dying, lost in the darkness. "I," said Despereaux, I will use thread." The threadmaster nodded. I see, he said. He took a meditative bite of celery. "You, friend, are on a quest." "I don't know what that is," said Despereaux. "You don't have to know. You just have to feel compelled to do the thing, the impossible important task at hand." "Impossible," said Despereaux. "Impossible," said the threadmaster. "Important," he said, chewing his celery and staring somewhere just past Despereaux, and suddenly he left off his spool. "Who am I to stand in the way of a quest?" he said. "Roll her away." "I can have it?" "Yes, for your quest." Despereaux put his front paws up and touched the spool. He gave it an experimental push forward. "Thank you," he said, looking into the eye of the threadmaster. "I don't know your name." "Hovis." "Thank you, Hovis. There's something else. Something that belongs with a thread." Hovis went into a corner and came back with a needle. "You can use it for protection." "Like a sword," said Despereaux. "Like a knight would have." "Yes," said Hovis. He gnawed off a length of thread and used it to tie the needle around Despereaux's waist. "Like so." "Thank you, Hovis," said Despereaux. He put his right shoulder against the spool of thread and pushed it forward again. "Wait," said Hovis. He stood up on his hind legs, put his paws on Despereaux's shoulders, and leaned in close to him. Despereaux smelled the sharp, clean scent of celery as the threadmaster bent his head, took hold of the thread around Despereaux's neck in his sharp teeth, and pulled on it hard. "There," said Hovis when the piece of thread broke and dropped to the ground. "Now you're free. You see, you're not going into the dungeon because you have to. You're going because you choose to." "Yes," said Despereaux, "because I am on a quest." The word felt good and right in his mouth. Quest. Say it, reader. Say the word quest out loud. It is an extraordinary word, isn't it? So small and yet so full of wonder and hope. "Goodbye," said Hovis, as Despereaux pushed the spool of thread out the threadmaster's hole. "I have never known a mouse who has made it out of the dungeon only to go back into it again. Goodbye, friend. Goodbye, mouse goodbye, mouse among mice." All right, and then we can see here Hovis giving Despereaux that thread and needle. Now, 5th grade, what do we think is going to happen? Make a prediction. And we'll just have to see if it comes true the next time we read. Nice job today.